people who are not here. And then let me just read there. I haven't read the whole thing. I'll post it here on our chat.
Ah, cool. And once again, I apologize if there was anything there that maybe isn't too faithful to what had been said. Cool.
I understand. Okay. So the point is that the proposal was to connect the symposium as one of the activities coordinated by this research coordinator. I see.
Precisely.
Okay.
Kind of, we kind of started thinking about what could be, what could be done, and everything else, and then kind of always landed on this, like, okay, what's in motion and what should be in motion. And then if we had this already in the bag, perhaps it would be easier to be more propositive, right? Like, okay, let's go.
John, what's my position on the matter? I don't remember. What is the thing we disagreed upon? I don't remember.
Basically, like, my initial proposal was inviting all the folks that we could, having something more general, like disorganization, addressing that. And then you responded having more specific focus on invites and trying to kind of like highlight STP theory as such. And that's a gross oversimplification, but that was the simplification that kind of regulated the conversation. And basically everyone else there was like, yeah, those are both good points. Let's find an intermediate position. That was kind of the
is this the thing when we were discussing the symposium and I said that I thought we had to have a clear strategic like what's the strategic value of the symposium? Is that like
that and also like not, I think, overextending who we'd like reach out to and whatnot. I think those are the main points.
Yeah, I don't even remember why. I mean, I do think that, you know, the question what we want to do a symposium for is a good question, generally speaking, and I stand by it, but I have no idea anything other than that. I feel like I don't have a position.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, they just became two kind of like sides of the conversation, like
Sure.
Having a kind of conciseness and focus and being strategic in who we invite, and using it as an opportunity to interface with other groups and try to like find mutual points of contact and topics of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And JP brought up a lot of really good points about what that strategy would look like in terms of finding people who are already engaged with our work and inviting them and trying to find topics that would overlap with their interests and their interests that overlap with ours, so that we'd have an opportunity to kind of find folks that are already finding our work interesting. And then, yeah, a lot of the conversations, and going back to Kaio's presentation on the research coordinator, it quickly became clear that a lot of the, especially logistical questions, we were kind of like begging the question we needed to deal with the RC first before we came up with all the details of what a symposium would look like. So it was almost like we were kind of jumping the gun in general with the conversation, and therefore decided to kind of return focus to this, but with the understanding that something like a symposium, conference, seminar, whatever you want to call it, would be a major kind of focus for the RC.
I guess there's even like a way to even integrate the two things a bit more, which is just to say, what if let's say since we're going to try out the research coordinator position, right? Like we're trying out the admin, we could just associate the research coordination, the first run, to whoever organizes the event. And that's, let's say, the duration of that position for this first run, you know, because it's something concrete that is like a overseeing position. It needs to steer research in a certain direction. So it's like a project, right? Perhaps. I'm not sure if we need to attach this thing so much, but if we wanted to give the research coordination like a clear goal for a couple of months, that could be one.
I think that makes sense, especially given that this would take a lot of planning, and to have someone dedicated already, and to have a position that would be also yeah, well, instead of going through that lap of presenting a project, this could be perhaps the first project that would make a lot of sense. It's going to demand a lot of time, right?
Yeah, I'm just looking here at the research coordinator proposal again.
I think maybe one question for the discussion today would be what's the kind of link between the coordination of research as such, like in relationship to STP, and something like a symposium? Like what exactly are we asking in terms of our current state of research? Like, I think one of the things we did come away from the last meeting that was in response to some of Gabriel's critical questions was we do want to highlight a lot of the research topics and questions of STP in a way that gets people engaged and excited about it. So how does that, in terms of like kind of assessing the larger state of conversations, research, etc., and interfacing with that, connect to trying to find, I don't know, you want to put it like common ground or interconnections within the group, like highlighting specific things that we're working on that overlap as members, and how that in turn interfaces with the larger conversations. I think that in many ways, like the politics and strategy for the RC is that question, in my head at least, as the main kind of tension, like the inside world and the outside world of STP.
Yeah.
I agree with this.
Sorry, go.
I was just going to say, I think one kind of sub project that could bind the general with the particular, like the general role of the RC with the particular task of organizing the symposium. A bridge for that would be like a tutorial or a introduction to STP's thought, or even a chronology or history of STP, because I think we have a lot of stuff accumulated over the years that we don't necessarily revisit, or it's kind of like an implicit background stuff. So having something that can condense that for newcomers to say, like, okay, this is where we have been, and this is, you know, what we're working on now is a continuation of these ideas. Having something like that as a finished product would be very useful, both for the symposium, because why would people attend the symposium if they don't know what STP is about, but also for the more general question of like cross-pollination.
I just wanted to say something, because I mean, perhaps I'm getting this wrong, because it's been a while since I participated in a conversation about any of these two topics, but I would just worry about something that was also a issue when discussing the central admin, which I think it's very different to choose somebody to do work for us and to choose somebody to rule over us, which is usually the opposite of doing work, right? In the sense of doing all the tasks or getting something accomplished. I think we came up with these two positions in part to decentralize power, both at the level of who has administrative knowledge and people who have too much, let's say, knowledge about one line of research, and then it ends up always being the middleman to connect with other things. So I find it hard that anyone, because honestly, like to get somebody to become a research coordinator and to be in a position to read everything, kind of summarize everything into an introduction to newcomers, I find it hard to imagine somebody who's going to do that, but I do think it's likely that somebody could take a look at this overview and say that we need that, and then propose that somebody do it. But like, I wouldn't necessarily expect whoever takes that position to do that sort of thing. I find it unlikely, especially since we were at first not even paying whoever takes the coordination position, right? So I don't know. It's just a concern. Like, I think that we're always oscillating with these ideas about, are we adding somebody who's gonna do the work, or are we adding somebody so that there is a rotating position of seeing the collective as a whole, right? That doesn't entail doing anything in particular, not even like being the person who organizes a symposium. I think it's a matter of collectively agreeing to trust somebody's vision of the totality of the collective on the administrative and on the research side. If that person is going to do something or not, I wouldn't count on it as an obligation, right? So from that point of view, the place where I see a clear connection between research coordination and a symposium is that if I were research coordinator, I would probably look at everything we are already doing, all the partnerships we already have that are scattered. The Communist Caucus, we're trying to establish connection with more militants in Lebanon. We have connections in Brazil. Like, those things are just laying around. It sounds strategic to me that one option for the symposium would be to gather these connections, right? Or as I think both Caron and John said from the summary I gathered, to connect with people who already are engaging with our work, right? So that's kind of taking a bird's eye view and proposing a symposium that is based on the totality of what we're doing. You know, something like that. I just have a hard time imagining that whoever we select will take on a task and then perform that task for us. Like, I think we're trying to give power to somebody, not tasks, right? But yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is the project.
Though I like the idea very much. I mean, I clearly like the idea of, you know.
Yeah, it can't be done by one person. Yeah, it has to be a similar thing where they're delegating, maybe something like going to each person in the group and saying, you know, how's your research? Where was your research when you entered STP, and how has it progressed since then? And just kind of compile what everyone's working on. Maybe that's the first step, and then.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
we've been trying to, that's exactly what we were trying to do with like the mapping of the STP. Then I did the diagram of all the projects that are currently going on. Like,
yeah,
I think that it's doable individually or collectively. I just think even if it is doable, I would just not assume it would be a task for whoever takes on. But I agree, it's very desirable that this happen.
Yeah, so I totally agree with all those points, and I think again, going with this idea of like the RC kind of being at the interface between inside and outside, like that's like that position itself, like holding that perspective will be a lot of work without then having to turn that into work, as Gabriel's pointing out. And I do think like for different reasons in the CA, this is definitely something we're going to want to encourage cycling. Like, we're going to want lots of different people to hold this position, which means we're going to have some kind of infrastructure around the position so that like we don't have to rewrite it all the time, we don't have to redo it all the time. Things do carry on, and I think it makes sense to autonomize that in the sense that like I really agree with Dennis and Gabrielle's feedback and Dennis's proposal around how we would do a summary. And I really think, you know, we should be encouraging people to, you know, condense down, to summarize what they're doing, and encourage the RC more to be a dialogic role, to reach out to people, to ask questions, maybe to help highlight what it is to emphasize in summaries. I mean, I do think that's always something from an inside technical perspective. What you think to emphasize is not always going to be the most useful from the outside perspective. So I think the RC can kind of help mediate conversations in such a way that, you know, we are producing materials that are not just informationally correct summaries of what we're doing, but are also rhetorically like compelling and effective outreach materials. And so, yeah, I don't think there's any way that the RC could actually do all that work and be in a position to hold that perspective. Like, that is a lot of work. But that being said, that means first off, like, we do have a question of like other people doing that work, which it's one thing to say, yeah, we don't want to dump it all on one person, but then also like we need to do it. But also I think like the actual kind of conversational work, quote unquote networking, that I think the RC would spend a lot of time doing would still be a ton of work. So I think that's something to address, like just to kind of maintain the position, like someone like Gabriel, who has been at like the intersection of a lot of people's research and programs. Like I know from talking to him that it's a lot of time. It's simply a lot of time before you get into the writing or anything, just to maintain the conversations, just to kind of mentally keep track of things, to take the time to think about someone else's work. Like these are all things that take time. So I think even if we don't load the RC up with tasks, we still need to think about the actual kind of labor that they'd be putting in simply to hold the perspective together.
I agree. I think that's the labor we want to. I mean, I wouldn't call it labor because it's. I mean, if you don't find it pleasurable to do it, I don't think you should offer yourself to do it. I don't think we need like somebody to sacrifice themselves to have some power. Like if you don't have some pleasure in it, you can let it somebody else do it. But that's what the people should be focusing on, like making sure they feel comfortable with getting to know what everyone else is doing. You know, I think we want to facilitate that this person feels like they are getting involved in the conversations, and not so they feel like, okay, I get a good overview, you know, and that their interpretation of what is lacking, what is missing, you know, is also important. So you will know you have power if, you know, you can circulate around the group, and then you can say something like, guys, I think that nobody here is talking about this, or clearly we are bullshitting about this, and we should, you know, develop something, and something follows from that, right? I think that little schema of you get to have an opinion about the totality, have an opinion about what is missing, and something follows from that for everyone. I think that's the minimal meaning of us giving somebody power over the collective research wise, right? Doesn't need to be like, okay, so now let's all turn and focus on this particular topic, but it can be like a strong suggestion, guarantee at least one meeting about it, or redirect a bit how the symposium, things like that. I don't know.
Yeah, one of the things I think that comes from this is anyone who is interested in the position will at least have would have the opportunity to do most of these things, and the delegating you speak of. I think like I don't know how much of this happens naturally in amongst people, which would require first and foremost, I guess, like the matter of affinity. Like, okay, like we've been working with this, we have this in common, but it's known by these two people, and this takes up a specific place in all the STP productions. But having this position, I think the ideal thing is exactly being able to bring some degree of unplanned synergy, I guess, like someone who's going to, okay, like you and you, I know both of you through like the research coordinator. I know you. You two don't know each other that well, but you have a lot, right? You have a lot in common. So I think this the central admin position does something similar, I think, in the sense of being able to I guess like a fear, being able to talk to, okay, could you do this? Could you perhaps do that? And yeah, in these outsourcing these tasks, I think this gives her like you said a better view of the totality, and that would be one of the first things for the RC. But also like this, yeah, being able to delegate. I think it's not about like containing all the directives and then pointing them out. It's more like perhaps being able to yeah, to generate more synergy, as I said before, I guess.
Yeah, I think in this context, you know, like if we say, let's delay deciding on a symposium, let's get somebody to occupy this position for a while, and then let's accept that there will be consequences to whatever the you know, interpretation and position this person has on what we need as a collective for a symposium. That would be a way of giving this person power over totality. That doesn't mean they're gonna prepare the symposium, coordinate it, anything like this. It's just saying like, hey guys, my position now is to be giving, like, taking this overview. I've looked into things, and my impression is that the symposium should go this way. And of course, we can debate and so on, but we would be willing to try out that idea, right? Something like this. I think that's the agreement we would be making, something like this.
Also, perhaps if it is to be open for the whoever takes on this this position, also maybe deciding on whether the symposium would be the first thing, or something that I think goes hand in hand with what John was saying, which is that this idea of compiling, if it is a project in and of itself, it will take a lot of time. Like I remember, I think it was you, Gabriel, mentioning this doing so for a translation, but already perhaps like just the compiling would take a lot of work, and finding what would be to, okay, like this sticks, this doesn't, reassessing it and, you know, skimming through it again and that sort of thing. Maybe if the person wants, or if the person has a view for that, maybe that might take place before the symposium too, right? I don't know if you think that could happen.
I love this. This was a very Lacanian way. Someone cannot not have an effect. they're cursed to have an effect. They're doomed to have an effect. Yeah, I mean, something like that. I think we're pretty much. That's why I think I agree with what Caio is saying. But I think in principle, if we select somebody to coordinate research, and we say this person has the purview of making some directions, and then we need to select what are the directions that would be under the purview of that position. If they are gonna like look carefully into the details, or if they're gonna be like a Zen master who just says, let's do this, and there's totally arbitrary, like, it's up to them. Like perhaps it's even better, you know, than like, I'm so careful about everything. I know perhaps it's better if they're not. I don't know. Giving power means that, right? I mean, you're not going to be able to oversee it fully. So I think there are different styles. Some people are better with like a last minute intuition. Some people will be really diligent and talk to everyone. Like they're the enlightened despots, there are the not so enlightened despots. And I think that's why my impression is that the RC position, the discussion for me is mostly about what are the areas this person who were ascribing some power over where the collective is heading, what are the areas in which this can be exerted, this power can be exerted? Like, is it a veto on meetings? I imagine not, right? It's not like nor a power to say you should research this. It sounds weird. But so what how will this power be exerted, right? Where can it appear? The symposium is one place where we can say they are ultimately responsible for building the basic skeleton of the proposal, but in a regular sense, like with just a regular function, like where would this appear, right? I think once we describe that, it's easier, because then it's about seeing if we want to try this out, giving somebody the power to say, okay, guys, let's try this direction for this period, you know?
Yeah, just in response to that question, what does it look like? I think the RC basically will have an effect on how STP is perceived, right? What lines of research are more dominant than others, and I think that's just inevitable because the RC cannot know what everyone cannot equally weight everyone's work. I think we have to be kind of open to that. The despotic aspect. I mean, it's not like everyone's research will have somehow be merged together in some like harmonious fashion, but some lines of research may have more intensity than others, as a result of like kind of a refraction process, right? If the RC kind of is like a prism that we're looking through to look at the whole of STP, then there's certain characteristics of a particular RC that will make some lines more clear than others. And that's actually a way of experimentation for us, like depending on which RC is selected, we're getting a different viewpoint on STP. So yeah, I think it should be a good thing, basically, that the RC is biased.
Yes, I agree. I'm looking here at the proposal, like it because I mean, just looking here at the proposal as it's written now, like what I think happens organically or spontaneously these days is people who present more or who come to more meetings or more kind of like I end up being like centralized because there overlap between the presentations of many people. It turns out that either because they present regularly, therefore funnel the certain amount of meetings in a direction, or because they're the ones that are most likely to do like retrospectives on what happened before, you know, you end up consolidating a certain way of viewing what's going on or moving ahead. I think that's the sort of thing that we're trying to decentralize or rotate, right? So for example, what I would propose now, thinking of it, to be very simple as a regular measure, it's like perhaps every 2 months, whoever is the coordinator does a retrospective on those 2 months, like a meeting that they're just going to present what was presented. So they're going to filter everything through their own view of what mattered, you know, the things that they don't understand anything about might not appear at all in that summary. The things that they care a lot about might appear more. So that's, let's say, a retrospective look at what was done. And there could be something of a prospect in the sense of an added meeting where they get to, I don't know, if not present, invite somebody to present, or call upon somebody from the group to present on something that they think is either crucial and is not being given enough attention, or it's being given attention but should be given more attention, whatever, you know, like one that is more retrospective and one that is more prescriptive. And then they get like 2 meetings in 2 months, so 2 out of 8 to push, you know. I don't know, something like that. Like that sounds like something concrete, but
For me, it's kind of what you're saying reminds me of the function of the +1 in CSII of sorts.
yeah, it's a bit, it's derivative.
Yeah, it's not like it's not. Of course, the +1 usually presented as well. Like if you wanted presented stuff, but a big part of it was just to give back to the group what the group have been doing. So in a certain sense, it's the +1 basically, right?
Yeah.
So it's a bigger kind of time lapse than, you know, a couple of meetings, something like 2 months or something like that. What I think is different is that while the +1 is had a kind of concrete protocol of how to do things, like you have the right to decide if we are, for instance, discussing a political matter or studying a text or anything like that, and you have a right for that, but you have an obligation to read the working notes and give back to the collective. So maybe, I don't want to push the analogy too far, but maybe it would be a good exercise to find the analogies between the RC and the +1. What are the obligation? What is the obligation? What does it count as giving back to the group something, and what does it count as doing, having the power to define a kind of route of investigation for the group, which is also something that +1 could do in the CSII. Not sure if everybody needs a kind of explanation of what the +1 was, but if you want to give it.
Yeah, just to clarify, because I think a lot of people didn't know this, but in CSII,
sorry, I was writing about this. I will send you the text. It's finished almost. So I was writing about CSII like last week, so yeah, it's really fresh.
Yeah, but I think it is a relevant connection, because in the circle, what we used to do is every meeting, everyone who was present at the meeting had to write a note with any content for the next meeting, and you were only part of the collective as long as you wrote those notes. And we had somebody, and we stole this from cartels, it was called the +1. The idea was that this person reads all the notes, associates the notes in whatever way they want. So it's, the notes are already written about anything, they don't need to be like specific on the content. The +1 would read the notes and just give people a interpretation of the notes, something like, last week a lot of people discussed questions of this nature, and some people asked these questions. I think they're connected in this and that way. I remember there was a person who did like a statistical analysis of the use of words in the notes, like it could do anything. But then after that, the +1 would do like a short theoretical presentation as well. So kind of, I see we're kind of connected, because the idea of, you know, you have the videos from the previous meetings. So you're private to everything that was presented. You have access to all the WhatsApp groups, so you can see what people are doing that's not presentation. So it's like political connections and so on. Every 2 months, you would just give us back a picture based on that, of what's going on, what you think is important, what happened, or how these things connect in your heads, you know, and so on. I would consider that the duty, because we like an obligation. And on the other side, the right you get is that, let's say, the next meeting, you get to, even if we're not going to follow, right? You have no power to guarantee that people follow. You do get the power to propose. Like, so every 2 months, we have a retrospective meeting and a prospective meeting where you say, I think that based on all of this, it would be really good if we could go in this direction, and then nothing happens. You know, like probably people will say, cool, but I don't know, from time to time, it might not be the case, and people actually engage, and that's enough, you know? And if you even do like a chain way where, let's say it's 2 months, the last meeting of the 2 months, the last meeting of the 2 months is the retrospective, and the prospective is the first of the next round. So when the next +1 does the retrospective, they need to include the perspective of the last one, you see? So it gets connected with the rest of the material, even if people think that there was no connection, whoever is the next person needs to establish a connection. So like it gets in chain, like it could work.
Yeah, something like that. But still, the difference is that we had like a concrete thing that even though the +1 could, I don't know, do something different, he had to do this and that, perhaps to establish something concrete that might be interesting for the RC. And I'm not sure if that is a good way of putting it anyway.
But you
Sorry,
think like having to do a meeting that is retrospective and having to do a meeting that's
for instance,
perspective.
I think having like an overt protocol, I think this helps. Otherwise, it will be kind of, again, like, you know, floating around the who has the, you know, greater transcendental intensity within the group or things like that. So I think having a concrete kind of overt protocol might help that
I agree.
rotation. Yeah.
I think Renzo had his hand up.
Yeah, Renzo wanted to talk something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention because CSI was brought up, because the counterpart of the +1 is the notes, right? Is the note the way I mean, I wasn't part of it, but the note gives the sort of material for the +1 to sort of like collect, right? And I mean, I think it's a really, I always liked this idea of the note because it seems I've never came across a mechanism in organizations that is effectively able to sort of like do like a proper census of what's going on, because whenever you ask out of people like, okay, what, you know, please speak, you never like, people are just like, but this mechanism actually like seems to make it surface stuff that is going on by just having people to like have to write something. So I wonder if at some point it actually makes sense or not for us. I mean, I know this goes to like open up, but since it was mentioned at CSI, it's not a problem if we randomly mutate back into like the circle mechanisms, right? If we rediscover that. But I just wanted to hear more about.
I'm all in favor of randomly mutating back into the circle. Sorry.
Yes, I feel we have this problem in STP, right? So like being able to source information from all members, like this equality, this sort of like sampling of information, even like someone like a centralized person who's responsible for having a global view doesn't necessarily has the condition to do this kind of viewing, because, and I think that nodes sort of like feeling for like it produces this sort of material for free association in this collective sense. So I wonder if we came up with anything close to that, because I feel we have this demand in the STP to like having input from everyone and like this equalizing principle, but I don't know if we have came up with a mechanism that did that job, and if whether either the central admin or the researcher is able to do the job without this sort of like decentralized, I think it's, yeah, I think it's very, how do you say, like astuto? Yeah.
Astute.
Yeah, it's astute, because I've never came across another mechanism that could do this job like it does, like it seemed that it did in some sense.
Let me just say that, I mean, the notes were really good, but there was like a black market of notes. There was like people writing notes for each other. It was like a total mess, but it was very informative. But I don't know. I think that given, I'm not sure if it's because of the blog, there were some blog posts that were longer, so people were like inhibited of writing shorter things and so on. And the work notes, they were just simple, much simpler.
Yeah, I think the blog is not the same. The blog kind of has built in it like a demand for a kind of a theoretical kind of I don't know, acumen, a certain kind of you have to say something clever. There's this pressure. You have to say something clever about your colleagues' kind of presentation, and I think people, bail from it because of that. I think it's not the same as a work note. I'm not sure how to change it though, to get it closer to being like a work note. I don't know.
The thing that makes me think that this, I mean, I wouldn't want to focus on that because that sounds like a separate thing from the RC discussion. Like if we establish work notes are about everyone else but the RC, right? So it's a weird roundabout. But a big difference that is relevant is that in the circle there was an inside and outside. We had like a closed group, and the idea is that if you don't hand in the notes, you're no longer in the group. Of course, you can join at any second again, but it was a mechanism of belonging, right? So if you don't do this, something happens. Of course, it's very reversible, and it was very funny in that way that you were expelled for one meeting. If you wanted to join, you could just join, but people got a bit anxious about it, and they didn't want to be expelled. So it's a funny thing. It's an interesting thing, but we don't work like that right now, right? I mean, we're very porous, much more porous with this frontier in a different way, at least. Like we're fuzzy, I think, STP, whereas the circle was more para-consistent, perhaps, like, or it was very clear cut, but you could just come back anytime. So I don't know, like it sounds like a conversation that involves other conversations. Like, would you rather have a mechanism for telling who's part and who's not part of the STP, and it would tell with no fuzzy space, either you are or you're not. That's not how things are right now. People can join meetings, they can just be coming to the meeting for a while, then they can be on the WhatsApp group and not say anything. They can not be engaged in any projects. They can emerge, come just to do the writing project, but not present. We have a more kind of margin of belonging versus this very clear-cut sense. So I don't think the work notes would be the same if they're not connected to a consequence of that type of effect, that you don't belong anymore. It was meant to be a mechanism of belonging, but I can see the plus one just with these two rows of retrospection and then proposing something to function by using the written material we already have and the recorded material we already have, like tons of WhatsApp messages for all the connections, groups, discussions we're having with other people, and the videos for all the meetings. Like, why couldn't that be the material that they based whatever they are gonna construct on?
I'm gonna actually hold off for a second.
Yeah, I think the problem with that is that it's too much, right? Like to see like hours and hours and hours of presentations and meetings. This would be analogous to ask the plus one to listen to the recordings of the meetings, like 3-hour recording of a meeting instead of reading a short work note. So I think there's a kind of a technical problem there. You just using the material that is recorded, it's too much stuff. And tons of messages on WhatsApp. Yeah, that's precisely the problem for me. It's like tons of messages on WhatsApp. So to have like a kind of discriminated limit, maybe not belonging because maybe you don't want to go there, but like a discriminated limit of this is what you should look into. If you want to look into the meetings and WhatsApp messages, it's okay, but having kind of a explicit mechanism would kind of make the workload lighter in a certain sense. And yeah, but this might be a good kind of picture of where the group is at. This specific kind of delimited kind of domain that we'll have to come up with if this idea sounds good for you guys. So John wanted to respond.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, I really like the fact that we don't have a clear inside and outside. I feel like a lot of political orgs have relied heavily on the membership as a overall means of structuring their group. And I think one of the really interesting challenges, and I think it poses an interesting challenge, and I don't think we should be adverse to letting that challenge remain a challenge, in the sense that, like, if we're going to be an organization that takes political experimentation as the basic thing we're doing, then the problem of getting it to work well is always going to be up for grabs. It's always going to be a problem. And so I think, like, just formulating it experimentally, in the sense of, like, how do you get a group that does not have a clear inside and outside to function, and in particular in such a way that you can guarantee some kind of, like, meaningful feedback for something like a note to work. Because I agree with JP. I have this issue with multiple groups that I've been a part of over the years, just like the deluge of information. And it's a challenge, and it's always interesting to me, because I think there are some folks who have a capacity to intake and stay on top of conversations, and then there are folks like me who I probably miss at any given point 75% of the chats and whatnot. But I wouldn't say that I don't have a perspective on the group that is not holistic any more than pretty much anyone at the conversation right now. And so, kind of like the question of, like, how would we go about doing a symposium? I think that is something we should kind of, like, leave open to the RC. Like, some folks will probably want to go back and listen to meetings and get a pretty good, almost academic perspective on the history of STP and the texts, and, folks that really thrive on the intertextual reference and whatnot. And then there will be other folks who really, kind of tune in on certain factors, certain things. Like Dennis was saying about different intensities. In a way, the RC is a measuring apparatus of those intensities, right? Like, the RC as a sensor rather than the person, like, sensing, if you will, like, what they're kind of doing will be informative to the rest of the group. And that's something else that I think is interesting in this idea of the note. There's, like, two levels of information that are important. There was the actual, like, content of the notes, but then there was what people were doing about the notes, like this black market economy, right? Both of which were informative. And I think for us, a lot of times it's that second level that's more interesting. Like, obviously we need to maintain some kind of flow of information, just like any group. That's information in a way is like our metabolic blood or whatnot, but, like, the experimental results are much more on the second level of, like, how are people actually taking up these various rules, processes, suggestions, ideas, challenges, goals, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think I think one way to consider this would be less the responsibility of doing something to stay in the group, and more the responsibility of not being someone who makes it difficult for someone else to do their work for the group. In other words, one RC might want to have people write things in, and they may request that. And the degree to which people don't do that will make it difficult for the RC to do their job. Another RC might just want to reach out and have conversations. And the degree to which people don't do that will make it harder for the RC to do their job. But I don't think we can, and this relates back to a lot of arguments that were being made by Gabriel and others around the CA position. We can't overly rule what that's going to be. That is precisely the experiment that any given RC will do. And I personally, like, I am not great at text, but one of the reasons I think I have a good perspective on the group is I've had a lot of interesting conversations one-on-one with people. If I were an RC, I would be talking way more than reading in this group. Other folks may be the exact opposite. And I do think we have to let that openness stand in a way that I think for CSII having a very particular structure made sense. I think we have to remain more loose and changing, but bearing in mind a lot of the principles that JP is bringing in as a kind of thing we expect from the RC to accomplish, however it is they personally go about doing it.
Yeah, in response to this, I was thinking like one way to get around the technical issue also that Karan was pointing out. I think we don't want the RC to be in charge of pre-chewing everyone's research because that's too much for one person. But I think a way around this is if there was like kind of an incentive for everyone to, if the RC is like a social censor, then if you don't impress the RC, then your research becomes less visible in the group. So that's one way to think of the function, is like you as the presenter should be pre-chewing or conforming the way that you present your research in such a way that the RC will be receptive to it. And that might be the way that like the RC doesn't have to do the work, because you as a presenter will already have in mind, okay, this person, whoever is the RC, they're more, you know, attuned to this type of, you know, tradition or this type of line of research. So I want to make my research appeal to that sensibility. So I don't know exactly the specifics of how we can do that, but I think it is different from the circle model, because CSII model is like it's really up to the +1 to pre-chew all the notes and come up with the story for the next meeting. But I think if we invert that and make the presenter responsible, it will make it a lot more possible, you know, for a single individual to do this job.
Yeah, I'll just say that I'm skeptical of the idea of people wanting to impress the RC, or the RC really being impressed by something that he or she is not already inclined to. So I'm kind of skeptical, and this is part of why I tend to, and this is going for some while, I tend to favor some form of return to some kind of overt protocol, explicit protocol in the STP, because I feel we function a lot in a kind of mode A, and mode A in a kind of a group situation with varying degrees of intensity tends to turn this world into an atonic world in Badiou's sense. Like I miss points, you see. I'm sure Badiouians will understand what I'm saying. I miss having some points in STP. You see, like you are either in or out, or you are doing this or that, or what's the criterion? Otherwise, it's up to habit, you know, to kind of get things going. And yeah, you know, this is a normal world. So this is my issue with that kind of solution, with that fuzzy solution. I think the world outside here is already fuzzy. So I think what was kind of important and different about the CSII was that it created points, even if, and I would disagree somewhat with the idea that the CSII was like normal political organizations that wage too much on membership, because there was this formal point, but membership, you could just go back. It was really easy to go back. So this is I think a crucial difference. It's not like a normal political party, for instance, where you have like this membership, heavy membership, that you have to do this and that in order to still count as a member. You just fill a form again and you're back. But this created a point, you see, and I miss having points. And this is something maybe personal, or maybe maybe it's part of my own kind of sociopathy or something like that, because Gabriel was always joking like how Caron is like a very kind of special kind of member of TCSI, because he's so much into the rules and into like the kind of the creation of these limits that the rules enable. But yeah, maybe it's something personal therefore. But yeah, I would plea for the creation of some kinds of points, you see.
I have a question that is similar to John's about the point thing, because I think that there is a thing, the way I see it is like in CSII, it's true, the work notes, they were very much like a either in or out thing in a very special way, because the background was already fuzzy, like what the real status of belonging, given that you can leave the collective and come back the next meeting. So it was against the background. I mean, points only count. You don't only feel them as a decision because that black and white situation appears against the background of something which is not black and white, right? It's not like we were a party that you are kind of stamped, now you're in, and that's forever. This was the whole thing. It was a black and white situation that was ephemeral. You had to redo it every time. I think, in my opinion, the difference between STP and the circle in this sense, and I think it is part of something that needs to be a self-critique of the circle as well, is that the very basic mechanism of the circle was created, we were constantly doing a therapeutics of that. So the fact that the work note, the +1, the very basic things to being the collective were a bit weird. We were always creating symptoms around it, and we were constantly responding to that. So let's say the thing being treated and the thing that was at stake was almost always the collective itself. Whereas in STP, I think that this went to the background, and the thing that we wagered that would appear as the place where decisions need to be made is the content of the research, right? This never became the topic on the circle. The research was always said to be an excuse, and we didn't have any commitment to move forward, to develop something consistent. It wasn't a concern, right? So I have the impression that I don't think that the STPs, personally, I don't think it's organized around the mode A, because we're very much mode C. We're very much like there is a margin. Nobody knows who is inside, who is outside, until you have a certain degree of intensity, right? And different points of intensity redescribe this open set in different ways. So there is a feeling that there's actually competition around research projects rather than, you know, exclusion that is actually included. Like, I don't think that sort of logic appears so much. Like, that's why I think
that's
that
debatable, but okay, that's debatable. But anyway,
yeah, I mean, in the sense that like we expel people or, you know, things like that. I don't see where is the. It sounds to me like, in a very intuitionistic way, whatever is the envelope gives the sense of where the boundary is in a fuzzy, still kind of fuzzy way, which is also anxiety inducing, because you can feel like there's something which is outside of that envelope, but you cannot see the border because nobody expelled you. But I find that to be a bit different than creating feuds of thought with this is the little group who is inside, that little group is outside. I don't know. So that's why I feel like it's hard to create a mechanism that will adhere to this very kind of nebulous distinction between the inside and outside, that will just set the points there. You do this to belong, because nothing follows from that at the collective right now, right? Yeah, I agree. It's more atonal in that sense. But that's my point. Like atonality and those things, they sound like a fuzzy effect of things being very fuzzy, and we are assuming that we have enough enveloping power, so somebody to synthesize things to give a sense of cohesion, right? So I think that rather than specific elements are left out, I think the problems we tend to face have more to do with specific elements have less degree of intensity from that synthetic point of view. And my impression is that what we're trying to do is to move that synthetic point of view to other people to give at least the opportunity for things that have a lower degree of intensity to acquire a better degree of intensity, right? A higher degree of intensity. It's slightly different simply because if this is correct, while the circle was more classical, right? In the sense of you're either in or out, right? And on top of that classical thing, we created some weird mechanisms. In this case, we would have to create a weird mechanism directly on the synthetic point of view, right? But I don't know, like, I'm just a bit worried because everything we try to create thus far that involves everyone doing something fail. Either because we don't know who's the everyone we should be supervising, right? Or because even if we felt like we knew, we simply don't have for some reason, we don't have the dynamic to affect things on everybody. Like, not everybody filled in the negative lottery thing. And what did we do about that? It was fine, right? So I think it's just a matter of like, what might turn out to be an effective way to solve the thing that you're mentioning, Caron. Like, for example, I do think that uncoupling, having let's say, the power to synthesize, this is where we're at, and this is a proposition of where to go, right? From the opportunity to chew all the data. Like, these things are not connected, right? I think it could have the power of creating decision points in that sense, because yeah, exactly as you said, and Dennis said, people will be biased. Like, if they only saw these meetings, or if they didn't have time to see any meetings and they're just still chewing on something that happened before, they can do a retrospective based on that, perhaps. And I mean, it will be also fuzzy retrospective. What is the boundary of that retrospection? I don't know. It will be weird. And it's a good kind of direction to expect whoever takes on this position to put things in such a way that can create some black and whiteness, right, about what to do next, right? I think that this is being left out, or I think that this is more central than we're admitting. Those are like propositions that could be points of decision, but they would be points of decision about the theory rather than about the limits of who is in the group. I think that's the distinction that might be meaningful, you know?
Yeah, I think one of the I do think there is an inside and outside the more I'm thinking about in terms of this conversation. It's just not the same. And I think what clicked for me is when Gabriel said, like, in CSII, it was the collective itself that was the kind of subject of anxiety or object of anxiety or whatnot. Whereas here it's the theory that is being put out. And that is practically speaking the inside and the outside. Like, do people have influence on what is being represented as STP theory? Do people, if they have disagreements, have their disagreements taken in? Like, that's an inside and outside. When a text gets published, you're either in it or you're not, and you're in it to various degrees. Maybe you're in it not because your name's in it or your words are in it, but because ideas that you've brought or sources that you've introduced have ended up having an influence. So there's still the fuzziness, but there are also very deliberate points, I think. I just think those points are different, and they very much are the place of publication, right? Like, I was not involved in the last one, but from what I heard from some limited feedback, a lot of stuff in a psychoanalytic sense came up in that process. So I think, like, the anxiety becomes about what is being published, what is being represented as STP, and how people feel and see that theory representing their work. And that's why I wanted to link that to that notion of representativity, which is generally has this idea that, like, to be a representative is to somehow occupy some kind of clear, empty, vacated place that then just takes up what, who you're representing or what you're representing. That's obviously not the case. And what we're really making space for is the impossibility for someone to truly represent the whole group, but rather to become a kind of censor for the different lines of intensity of the group. And I think that I really like this. There are different intensities that, insofar as different people are holding that position, those are going to be very real. Those differences between intensities will be different from person to person occupying that position. How they're going to look, how they're going to feel, how they're going to think them are all going to look very different. So having the position, having that be what it is we're experimenting on, you know, in a sense, like kind of using the analogy of like audio analysis, right? Like different people are going to provide different kind of filters to analyze the intensities in the group. And I'm just starting to scratch the surface of some like synthesizer stuff, but it's very clear that it's not like a chorus is better than a flanger, right? Like they're different things that have different roles. And I think that it's very similar here. We're going to find that people are not really better or worse. One person's a chorus and one person's a flanger. One person's like one kind of sensory apparatus and one's another. But I think the RC, one of the main reasons it came up was not around like, oh, what are you researching versus what am I researching? It came up around like, how are we going to put this all together into concrete publications with deadlines and word limits, and like the need to fit into some kind of editorial framework, right? So I think I think that's a place to follow on the despotic rules of mode B, which I really like, and I support in these cases. Like we should have more structure around publication. We should look at the problems that have come up in the last few publications and where they've broken down and see what we can learn from them. And we should like empower the RC to be a little despotic in that regard. And that's where I feel like the desire will come in, not to impress the RC in and of itself, but to get your ideas in the final product. That is a desire that I think most people here have on some level or another, or at least enough to where we keep the engine of interest running.
Yeah, it's along these same themes. Like I was thinking of a thought experiment, which is that if you imagine STP as a set, not of people, but of statements that we hold to be true, that STP holds to be true, right? Then all of this, when we're talking about the dynamics of intensities and so on, the point or the decision that needs to be made is what belongs to the set, right? There's a lot of like let's say variations and themes and motifs that reoccur in the presentations themselves, and there's some like cross harmony or whatever between different things. But when it comes time to write a text, we have to go one way or the other. We have to choose one stance over another. And like when we look back onto STP, we have these very concrete sets of statements, like the 6 theses on the social world, or you know, our statements about Marx or whatever. Like we have a particular reading, but this reading is not necessarily everything is something that every individual in the group agrees on. But at some point we had to make that decision. We had to make a cut to include or not include statements into the set. So I think that's kind of a helpful way to think of it, is like it's like a set of statements that we carry with us. And then, yeah, so but then what is the role of the RC in mediating that? Does the RC the one that will now decide officially what's in that statement set? Or are they, I don't know, yeah, how do they mediate this construction of the set?
Yeah, as far as I understand, just to translate this into normal people language again, as far as I understand, what we're saying is the question, can we have somebody with a function of synthesizing retrospectively what we've been working on and proposing something either in like one meeting or two meetings as a fixed thing, as Caron said, without creating a mechanism that everyone is contributing to facilitate this being kind of chewed down to a scale that somebody can actually process? Or are we saying that if you want to be a RC, you actually need to come to every meeting for that period, because the only way to be, you know, aware of everything? And I think that the way I understand that conversation went to the fact that, well, adopting the work notes would have additional benefits, because as Caron said, well, that there is a benefit to come with, you know, having this sense of clearer in and out being established, like in a week to week or whatever way we would use these work notes and connect that. So even if it was a change, it would be a change that would also come with collateral benefits. And other people were arguing that it would require us to change, let's say, what's the way people belong to the group right now, right? I do think that this is, I'm not sure if it makes sense, Caron, but I do find it convincing that there is a kind of a displacement from CSI to STP in terms of, are the conflicts even centered on belonging, or are they centered on belonging of people or theoretical statements, as Dennis said, right? And
No, I agree with Dennis. I think that solved the problem. In a certain up to a point. I think his description is on point.
yeah,
What I would disagree though with John was that there are points. I think that, yeah, there are points, but these are implicit. These are kind of, yeah, you know, this is what I'm calling kind of mode A's, like affinity mode or habitus or whatever, something like that. Whereas having an explicit point would be interesting. And
but
of
what
course,
would be an explicit point at a level of theory? Just to give an example.
I don't know. I think the example was given here. For instance, what will be included in a publication? This is, of course, so the problem is the point here is tethered to an occasion, to a specific occasion. So we'll have to think of the next publication, maybe an yearly paper like we've been doing with Crisis and Critique, maybe contingently, but we've been doing with Crisis and Critique annually, right? Yearly. So something like that. I think it was John that proposed that the point is driven by what's in the text for publication. I think that's a good description, but that's not necessarily a good rule, I think. But that's a good description. That's a good description.
But wouldn't you also say that, I mean, couldn't we just have that? It sounds to me that's implicit, that if we're rotating the people who take on 2 of every 8 meetings, I'm assuming that's like a possibility, 2 out of 8 meetings where they get to give their account of what is unseen in the collective, retrospectively speaking, and how to make it more visible. I mean, I don't think that there is such a thing as guarantee of points, like
there used to be, but I'm being convinced. There used in CSI there was a guarantee of points.
No, I mean, I don't think there was. Like, I think that something interesting could emerge out of the problem of the work notes. That was the possibility. But I mean, it's impossible to guarantee that there will be decisive moments. Like, how can there?
Yeah.
Like, it was a classic. Yeah, I mean, there must be a distinction between.
But it was axiomatically defined. The point was axiomatically defined for the CSII. Here it is not. Here is like, we have to publish something. So what's in and what's out? This is kind of very different for me. I don't know.
Yeah, I just think that there should be perhaps another understanding, but I have the impression that there being a rule doesn't make it a point. That just means that there is an explicit rule, and you can tell if people are following or not. That it could produce interesting, surprising effects. That has to do with it being decisive, right?
No, agreed. But
for example,
having explicit rules is conducive to having points. I will make it weaker. It's not that having the rule is the point, but having rules is conducive to having points, something like that.
Yeah, but I agree. But then in that sense, I mean, we could try to revise if people agree on this, because again, we try to establish many rules here. like people would present and refer to other people's presentations. Everyone, you know, like things like that. And we didn't manage to establish many of those. So I don't know, like, I feel like there are situations that are decisive and that we do try to take advantage of them to rethink things. Point in case being, we're discussing for 4 months now what to do about our own rules because of events that happen in the collective. So if that's not a decision point, I don't know what it is. Like, again, something happened, we said we need to make decisions based on this thing that happened, right? It's just that it doesn't have the explicit form of a rule written on a project. So the whole only point I see with the bigger discussion is, I think we could open, if this is something of everyone wants, I think we could open the discussion, should STP be more classic in the sense of, even if it's the most fluid in and out, should it have a clearer sense in which if people don't do something, they're out? But I feel like that is a even more structural discussion that could be had. And I have the impression that some of the issues you raised about if my research gets a better position and excludes other people's research, which is basically what we're talking about, I don't think that will solve it, because people can just do the basic to belong to the collective and write their work notes, and still we're not responsibilizing new people for, you know, making the synthetic one. So the issue will still have to be solved anyway. But if we do assume the work notes and we do associate the belonging to some explicit rule, I think it could be discussed as well.
Well, it's not that I'm saying that we should adopt the work note, but maybe have something in place that works like the work note, something like that. And maybe that could be more content oriented than, you know, collective oriented, belonging oriented. I agree with the point's reason. But I think my point still stands. I think there's, I don't know, kind of too much atonality, which is kind of weird for me to complain about that. But there's so much atonality for me going on. I would be comfortable. I think more comfortable having you know, some mechanisms that are conducive to points. And these points are not determined by affinity or habitus, like something like that. It is a kind of leverage from habitus or something like that. I don't know, something like that. But I'm just thinking out loud, really. I don't have any solution to that. But I like the points being reasoned. The points. I mean, I like what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I don't disagree about the idea of the points being kind of on the register of mode A right now in terms of the group. And I think that connects interestingly back to what Dennis brought up earlier about how, like, there's a certain kind of fuzziness like mode C. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but just to hone in on the whole question of publications, right? Like, publications, even in the most leftist journals, I think probably most you know better than me from practice, is like a capitalist enterprise. Like, we are constrained to present our theories on the level of mode C at some level just to get out there. And like a lot of left-wing groups, since we don't have the resources to rely upon all the kind of secondary social reproductive labor that goes into large organizations, we fall back on community mode A means of organizing. Like, I think that's true on both poles, right? Like, we kind of have to mode C in our relationship to the outside, and we kind of have to mode A in how we get things done and how we motivate to get things done, especially around like publications, right? Like in conversations that happen, and the entire kind of collective network process that makes a group paper possible, right? But I think for me, especially if we're going to anticipate any kind of debate on the structure of the group like Gabriel was proposing, I would say that rather than trying to go to mode B, it would be more a question of treating that as the problem. Like, how do we organize mode A better than the typical left-wing cliquishness, right? I think that mode B is a place to have rules and protocols in place, but I tend to think that that is actually at a higher kind of level, or more episodic level, I guess you could say. Like, I think what we're doing now, right, and what we did with the CA, that's the Boolean moment, right? Like, we are affirming we are now going to have a central admin. There wasn't 1 0, there is 1 1. There's no fuzziness to the position, there's no contradictoriness to the position. And that to me is kind of like the old school Bolshevik democratic centralist idea, right? Like, we're committing to a person holding a position. We may not all agree, but the only way to carry out an experiment is if we all in good faith attempt to carry it out, and then look back and say that worked, that didn't work, da-da-da-da. And I think that that's our mode B, are these kind of like constructions of positions in which we give people power as a necessary component of this larger project of political experimentation. But they're more sensors, or in the CA's position, it might be more like a data processing or something, like, not to dehumanize, but rather to try to like take away some of the strange fetishisms of these positions and stuff. But I think we do want to acknowledge, I guess, the political terrain on which we're making these rules. I think mode A, and I had a debate recently with Anna about Karatani and mode A, and I think she makes a much better case for Karatani's notion of mode D as a kind of higher level mode A than Karatani does himself. So I've had to think about it more in those terms. But there is something about mode A that we do want to recover and study, because it's the most suppressed under capitalist conditions, right? So if mode A is something that's emerging, even if it's problematically, it's still a real opportunity to explore organizationally what we can do with that register of organizational logic. Yeah. And then I think that ties in also to how I would propose an answer to Dennis's question about rules and the changes between them, because I think rules that work are going to like kind of stick in place, right? Like, that's the thing. Like, if we develop a good way to publish, I think that will kind of organically almost stick in place. Like, we're struggling with that right now. So if we figure it out, why would we toss that machinery out? But I do think insofar as we identify things that aren't working, that's precisely where we should let the RC kind of be despotic. Okay, this hasn't been working. We've been trying to get this to go for years. Let's try this now. But if if the next RC happens to figure out a great way to do something and it's not apparent why we change it, I feel like those are the kind of things that will start to develop over time. Obviously, that always brings up questions of conservatism and what happens when you meet changes, but we can't kind of a priori figure that out. But I think that's how I'd parse it up in my head. So I'll wrap on that.
Just before we get to Gabriel's comment, just John, your last statement, you're saying that you think the RC could be the one to either negatively decide on rules, so basically like let's throw away a rule, or potentially bring forward, basically like decide on the rules, right? Can add or remove rules.
I think under the condition that there's a kind of larger collective recognition that something's not working, I think they would have to make a much stronger case if, like, again, if we came up with a good process for publishing and they wanted to do something different. I think that would be less a question of, oh, we're just going to assume you can try it, and more like, we'll give you an opportunity to present, certainly, but we are going to, and that could be another way to think of a place of mode B is, right, like, if things are working, maybe that's precisely when we should have more votes and like yes or no questions too. But yeah, I think if we're coming together and there's a general recognition that, you know, X isn't working, then that's when we should give the RC more, you know, despotic powers to just say, okay, we're going to try project A until we see if it works to solve problem X, you know. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I guess I'm wondering what's left for us to discuss right now. Like, what do we need to decide on? I think
Well, I think just the question is that the basic version of this, even before we add like this, are there general rules for this position? Are they going to be specific? Like, is this a basis for something we want to put to a vote to everyone? Again, like in the sense of, because there will be two votes, right? A vote, which is this the final proposition, which is a vote voluntary for everyone to vote. And then once this has been defined as the proposition, there would be a negative lottery, which is we will draw out people and they can remove themselves if they're chosen, right? If they can say, I don't want it, if they get to be chosen by this lottery. So can we settle on what's the thing that is at least gonna go to the first vote that we can write up based on Caio's presentation and our conversation, and then put to a vote, hey guys, do you guys approve this to be the thing under discussion? Like, or should we have more specificity to it, you know, like or just go to a different direction?
Yeah, I think keeping the proposal lean is always better. Just practically less for everyone who's voting doesn't need to parse and decide on everything we've been discussing in today's meeting. Things like what Karon's saying, do we need more rules? Do we need to, you know, enforce more points? I feel like we can delegate that to the given RC. Whoever's the RC, if they want a more structured approach to things, a more decision making, enshrined in rules, then that RC has the power to make that happen. But we don't need to decide that. So I think the minimal thing that you propose, Gabriel, the RC will present a retrospective and then a proposition on how to make some intensities more intense or less intense, right?
But following what Caron said, should this be attached already to like, in a given period of time, there will be a meeting that is dedicated to the retrospective, and then another to a perspective? Or is this one meeting for both things? Perhaps it's enough, I don't know. But like, should we have something concrete like that? Or should we just leave it very general with no specificity to it? And then that's like something we sort out afterwards. Would you rather have?
Yeah, I think sorting it out later. Because actually, with the thing you're saying about the retrospective and the prospective, it involves two people, right? Both the current RC and the new RC. So why don't we say that this decision of how those meetings should be structured should be left up to those two people? How they want to do that. Like we can agree that we need a meeting, but how the meeting is structured should be left up to them.
Because can I just go back to a point because of what Caron is saying, that I think that there are two things being discussed at the same time. There is the issue of the RC having functions of retrospection and then proposing something, and the issue of when and how will they do this, which is just the rule for that particular thing. And then there are the other set of rules we were discussing about, should STP have more rules in general, more explicit rules in general, and will the RC have some say in this or not? Which I agree with. I totally agree with you personally. I don't think that general rules of the collective can be RC specific.
You can't like bi-monthly change all the general rules of the collective because the RC is a different person. I think this doesn't work. But
Yeah,
I see your point. Okay, taken.
but man, like I honestly think like if you feel strongly about this, we should schedule a meeting about STP and having STP project, STP and CSII and whatever. But we can discuss this as well. Just think that probably if we try to have the two conversations at once, it's gonna look like the position of the coordinator is more inflated than it needs to be, like as if they need to take on more than.
Point taken.
But yeah, because I mean, from what I gather, it should be easy to. I'm not sure, Caio, if you want to try your hand at just summarizing this idea that the RCs like needs to, is the person who's going to have a synthetic responsibility. They don't need to see everything to, like, we accept that they'll be biased, right?
Yeah, I want to go back perhaps to that first, see if we can find that first, the Lacanian point that John ended up making. I think if we could find
they're trapped into having consequences.
They're trapped into having an effect.
They cannot not have effects. Yeah.
They cannot not have. Yeah, I think that's the best. If we could, I think I'll go back to the file and put this in as one of the general directives. But then the case just becomes this has been there for quite some time. It was similar to what happened with the central admin in as much as we had put it there, and then these things appear more in the meetings themselves. They don't appear so much as additions to the text. So inputting this, is that enough for us to go on and take up the negative lottery already, or is there like putting this up there and then voting on things as is, and then the negative lottery? Are we going to do still 2 steps, or inputting that we're pretty much agreeing that, okay, it will be experimental, we have this as a directive, now all we need is the name. What should it be?
I don't know. My personal position is that we should open a vote and say, guys, we define the RC position as the person who, for a certain period, will be responsible for offering a retrospective of what we've been up to, with bias and all. Hopefully, looking for things that are underrepresented, discussed, and so on, and then to propose a prescriptive direction to deal with this. Is this an okay description of the RC? Can we move on to the lottery? And then we would have like that 1 week voluntary vote and open the negative lottery next week. Just because I think people won't understand what they're voting, what they're accepting or not accepting if we don't have that for a week, I don't know. It doesn't even need to be in a tag, like in a separate Google Doc. It can be straight on a little message with the voting below, because it's simple. Like it's kind of the thing being put to a definition is quite synthetic, right? What is a proposal requirement?
I just mean that they have to give at least one like meeting to the group. I do think that should be.
Yeah, I agree. I think Caron was also right when he said early on that like this should not be like just an abstract thing. It should have like some concrete component. That's how we guarantee that they have power, right? They will be allotted some of our time just for them to speak their mind and to propose it, right? I would even like,
but also,
some level,
like,
I would even like more than that.
Could also be, well, also depending on the person, that could also be under like requirements and not part of power too, right? Like, that's why I think it should also be listed. Like, someone might be interested in this position and not be excited about proposing and realize, oh, okay, that's something I gotta do. So I think it should be in there for a few reasons. Yeah.
Mhm. No, I agree. But what I was gonna say is that I even wonder if this is enough consequentiality, like just having one meeting where you present something. Like, I wonder even if there shouldn't be like you're the RC for a period. I mean, we don't need to decide this now, but it's just so we can speculate. Like, we could have an RC for a period. You do the retrospective, you speak your mind about things that you think are, have a low degree of existence. Then, I don't know, some time passes and you're allowed to give like a quick evaluation. Like, hey guys, I mentioned all those things and nothing was done about it. Like the power of embarrassment, at least of others. Like, something not to make this just like you speak and people say like congratulations and then nobody talks about it again. Like, but as Dennis said, perhaps as Dennis said, we can get to this as in a second stage. Once the person is chosen, I don't know if we need a duration for this already, but like, what info do we need to put on to a vote? Like the RC structure, which we just discussed, right? Retrospection. First, I don't think they do. I think it's the opposite. Real dictators make people cry. Duration, perhaps, at least for the first time. Concrete power, like one meeting or something like this. Like, what else do we need to?
Yeah, just on a more serious note with that overall point, though, I think maybe something we should mention is just like the openness of the position, in the sense that, like, hey, we've talked about publications, we've talked about symposia. There are like kind of ideas out there about what the RC could do without any particular commitment to any of them. Just again, to kind of for two reasons. One, to kind of just condense down into a nice, neat proposal for everyone in the group, kind of all the conversations and ideas have been going on. But also, like, theoretically, let's say like we did do a symposia, it was really good, we started to build on it, it became a tradition or something that like was bigger than us and other people expected. That could become, as time goes on, like more something we do expect the RC to take on, right? Like, I think that over time, like, kind of a lot of JP's points may emerge experimentally, in the sense that we do end up saying yes or no, this is a requirement of being research coordinator. And I think it might be worthwhile to kind of point to that, just that there are open questions about what this entails. And part of the early RC's job is to kind of like to probe that and to experiment and whatnot, with the understanding that some of these may get more concrete and regular and habitual in a good habitus way going forward.
So as to just add something there, now could we then perhaps just agree on that this should be in the purview? Okay, like a retrospection prescription meeting, and then we could leave it as one, and then just this is to be, if we were to as you said, like, oh, give this as something free. Okay, like this should be proposed throughout the duration of the throughout the duration of the position, because it's supposed to be like similar to the central admin, right? Like, okay, there's a time of beginning, there's a time of ending. So would this be something to be done once during the term, so to speak? Or is this something that we can right now just, okay, like every 2 months, as you had said that it was done in the CSII? Could we at least, given that we have we're in a we're here, could we perhaps vote on this here and then just put it there and then put that to vote? Every meeting, yeah, so
Yeah, that was.
if I'm presuming this wouldn't be the case for this position, right? Like
Yeah,
this
I
would
mean,
be
it's just
done
like whatever the duration is, at least once in the duration, something like this.
once in the duration would be, does everybody agree on that? Like putting at least once during the duration to give this sort of feedback to the group?
Yeah, at least
Yeah.
once.
At least, right? I'll put there at least, and then okay, if someone feels like they want to systematize it differently, maybe they can do it more frequently. I think that would be open, but put
Mhm.
here at least once during their term. I'm writing it there if anyone later wants to take a look and
Where
change
is
something.
where is it?
I'm writing it in the file.
Yeah.
There I put an uh, extra row. I'll highlight it here.
But in that sense, we could
Here.
probably, I mean, the other things which are a lot of like keeping tabs on ongoing research, ensure dissemination of our research, work closely with members. I think we're kind of
We could,
remove those, right? I mean, they
yeah,
might be
yeah.
the style of the RC, but they might not. Like that's fine also.
Could we just take it all out then? Like
I
leave
don't
it
know. I
as
have the impression that
this
we
would
could.
be like. Yeah. Yeah, actually, so if that's the case, I think it would be nice to synthesize what John said and put that in the text and summarize a little bit of what has been discussed here and put it back in the text and leave this as one of the concrete obligations. And then also here the selection process, I think pretty much this has been dealt with. It's going to be the negative lottery. There's no this was written before, right? So this would be taken out. It's going to be a negative lottery, and then uh, I, I think central admin had a presentation, right? Would we maintain this similar to what central admin had,
I think
or given the degree of the discussion now?
I think it was simplified. Like from the way it's written now, I think we could just people kind of offered through the negative lottery to participate, and their presentation is a retrospective, prescriptive thing, no?
So just to keep it clear, and then at least.
Just as Kai was typing this, I'm just asking, like, this means that we're separating the symposium from the RC discussion, right?
If we do want to join, I'm not sure if we should separate the vote, but if we do want to join, we can just say, let's make the symposium part of this prescriptive conversation. Like,
Okay.
I don't know, we could still join the two things and say, whoever's chosen, the time that they're making this retrospective prescriptive presentation, there is a content to that description itself, which is to give a, you know, to point a direction with the symposium itself. Like if we want to give it like even more concrete sense of, you know, something that pushes us to a direction which is not just, you know, inconsequential.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because it kind of means I think instead of enforcing the questions that, I mean, we can still try that, but I'm just wondering, like, in the long run, instead of enforcing what questions need to be answered by the RC, if we just leave it up to the RC to highlight. So maybe we're not ready for a symposium if the RC doesn't prescribe it, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's the outcome there.
I mean, if the, yeah, I agree with Canon that like implementing big rules based on the RC might be complicated because these things need like a bigger frame to catch on, right? Perhaps, but one option that kind of includes the symposium but could include other things is to say, like, this prescriptive presentation, it should have kind of ruled outcomes. So like, we do the symposium in this way, or for the next RC's duration, the following rule is recommended to be implemented, and then it lasts for the next cycle of the next RC, that there is some procedure in place. But I agree that like it might be too short a rotation, and I mean, to have rules attached to this. But if we did want to make it like extremely consequential, this prescriptive moment of whoever's doing the coordination, it could be also a good moment to say, okay, like, given what we've been up to, I think that we should try to work from now on with the research under this premise. Everyone does a work or something like that. But I agree that there's something about that is not the best way to implement rules in a collective, right? So, but just saying that, like, things like the symposium could be attached to this prescriptive moment.
So as of now in this text, I probably shouldn't put any of that as not tainted. Like, okay, we'll leave this open, and once again, that will be one of the incumbencies of the RC. So then, leaving it as open as possible, I think that's the directive as of now. Would that be it?
Yeah, that sounds correct.
And then, so at the end of today's meeting, we leave the week for voting. If anybody wants, once again, to maybe add something there to maybe highlight something, or again, like this text was there for a while, and we were discussing it for some time. So I think that now in voting this week, giving this week at least, we'll have time to for people to take a look who haven't seen it before, and then next week we'll do the negative lottery. But are we doing a meeting for the negative lottery, or is it I think Fear already put it there, the file. Is it something that's going to happen like just through the just on the WhatsApp group, or are we going to have a meeting for it?
I don't think we need a meeting. Like, I think that we can just in the beginning of next meeting do the negative lottery. If we do the voting on the, like we create a poll either tonight or tomorrow morning on the group, we can do the negative lottery either, Monday night, next Monday night, and we'll have a meeting anyway. We can just quickly go over what it means and
Quickly go over it.
yeah, I mean, it's fine. Great, Fernanda. Just to take advantage of the fact we're all here, Fernanda, how is the transition process going for you? Like as I said, I was worried that we're not moving forward with the, making sure the financial requirements you made are being met, because you said you would be starting in November, like full on, or October?
No, it was October.
Yeah, so
Yeah, but I was thinking about it, but I don't know. I don't know if I feel comfortable with the financial aid because I don't think I'm like keeping up with the function. I thought that one of the points of the central admin would be to like to put forward. I don't know if this is the verb, but I think it is to put forward the discussions and the what is happening in the groups, etc. And I don't think I'm doing that very well. So I was thinking like, okay, maybe we can talk about this position. I don't know. I want to think about it. It's okay.
no, of course, it's whatever you want, but it's, I mean, if it's being hard for you to do it, we can also see if there's anything we can help with.
Yeah, it's just a lot of personal stuff going on, and has been hard to manage. And like sometimes these little tasks, they can be more demanding if people have anxiety than the bigger ones. Like, I don't know if you guys feel that way anyways. But I think we can talk about it. I was thinking maybe because in October we have a lot of meetings already scheduled, I think. And then maybe later in November we can revisit this position, etc. I don't know. Revisit the idea, I think, because I think the idea of the central admin is great. I think we need to decentralize and try to engage more people in the group activities, etc. Mainly the decentralization stuff. I think maybe we can think about this because, like, when we did the negative, sure, when we did the negative lottery, I think we had some kind of amostragem. I don't know how to say this.
Like a sample.
Yeah, like a sample of who would want it to be central admin, and there was like very few people. So perhaps we can go over this. I don't know how you guys feel about it.
You mean go over the sense of changing who is doing it?
Yeah, if the central admin is something that is the best solution for us in this decentralization thing, I don't know, I think we can talk about it. I don't think I'm able to talk about it now, but later we can talk about it and come up with something more structured to bring to the meeting.
Yeah, I think that would be good, because if it's something that it's, I mean, if you need more time, that's fine. If you think that the idea we came up with is bad, we should also talk about it. If you think that you're just not in a good moment to do it, that's also fine. It would just be good not to put pressure on you unnecessarily, you know?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think we can discuss this.
Let's talk in the central admin WhatsApp group. Like, we don't
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
wait for a meeting. We can talk about it.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll send a message there. So in the RC thing, are we settled? I think we have the proposal. Anyone wants to? The symposium, I think that Dennis, I think it was Dennis that pointed this, that maybe we can feel how the RC thing goes, and then later we see if we are ready for a symposium. I don't know. Or do you guys want to keep the separate discussion and go back to the symposium thing after a little break, or if we end up this meeting today? I don't know. When, sorry.
Yeah, I think in general, it seems like keeping things separated is best in the beginning. Because I feel like every time we propose a new change to the group, we want to throw in everything into one thing. Like, oh, not only is the RC going to do this, but they're also going to be in charge of this, and then we're going to also, accomplish these things. So it always makes it less likely that we'll reach any decision. And so I think keeping it separate is good, and slowly introducing these changes and then reevaluating, like we're doing with the CA. The CA is still an experimental thing. We're just trying it out now. So it's before we say let's start this big thing, we need to evaluate if the decisions we've already made are good, right? They make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can go, John. Sorry.
Yeah, I also think we can get into the nuances of this in the WhatsApp group or in another meeting, but I think maybe we shouldn't necessarily immediately say that the reason we would be compensating someone for something is, to pay them for the labor of the particular tasks they're doing. Like, I would say the fact that you're dealing with that anxiety is already a good reason for compensation, precisely because, again, that's the sensor, right? Like, that's an indicator for the whole group that there are problems. You're just the person that has to now deal with that anxiety. Now, I could totally see how giving, like, compensation, whatever you want to frame it, will still create anxiety regardless. So I'm not saying this has to be, but I just would open that as an opportunity to think about it differently, and again, to put this in a much more experimental framework than in a sense of like, this is a defined job that you now have to do X, Y, and Z for every week, and more like, sorry, you have to deal with all this shit. Here's some support for simply having to now occupy this role.
I agree.
Thank you, guys. It's just hard to bring this up. Anyways, but yeah, I think that your guys are right. It's something that, like, it has a place in the group to talk about it.
Yeah, I really think, Fernanda, you should. I know it's hard, but I think you'll be well rewarded by trying out how ready people are to take these things on here. Like, nobody's gonna think it's a personal thing. It's, you agree to do something nobody really knows how to do here. So
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing. Like, when we have the text, sorry, but the text that that centered me needs to do, etc. but still is a experimental function, so it's easy to be like, okay, I'm not doing enough. I need to do more. There's something more there, etc.
I also think that this is something that I mean, this is for me the good part about the difference between, you know, when we had like a group that had like rules on paper and we used to follow them versus this thing which is very messy. The piece of paper is always just an attempt to try to solidify something that we are doing. It's not the thing that is gonna tell you what to do, you know. So in between a piece of paper and the reality of what you're doing, the reality of what you're doing will always have the upper hand, you know, of what you're doing or what is hard to do. Like, it doesn't matter if it's written on a piece of paper. What is a piece of paper, right? So I wouldn't be too focused on that. Like, if we agree to do something and then we cannot do it, the agreement was wrong because we cannot do it. So we didn't take something real into consideration. Not it's in under no circumstance can the piece of paper be more right than what you're going through, right?
Yeah, that's hard for a law student to hear. Yeah.
You know, there is positive jurisprudence and there is negative jurisprudence. We just invented negative jurisprudence, which is if something falls outside of the law was wrong. Yes.
That's like new Pachucanis and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah, I think-
let's try to talk about this on WhatsApp then. I mean,
yeah,
I also think
definitely.
there is an additional problem, which is, you know, there are issues which are, let's say, the level of theory or debate, but there are issues that are the level of functions and tasks. It's always hard to bring something up because you can feel very vulnerable that, you know, it sounds personalized. So I think you should also have the prerogative of choosing the best forum to bring these things up so you're not exposed, you know, if you feel like something is making you anxious.
Yeah, think about it.
Okay, so are we all allowed to have dinner now? Is that
I think that's it, right?
okay? Okay, guys.
Yeah.
No dinner, no comments.
No
The
comments.
best diet. Yeah.
Okay, we can
Okay,
talk about
everyone.
this. Bye.
Everyone.
Bye bye.
Have a nice
Bye.
day.
Bye, everyone.